teach you how to connect two objects together without a mouse. Let's look at making new objects with our JavaScript file. So we're going to create a new function and we're going to call it function object creation. We're going to send this one variable, and that variable is going to be var num objects equals a. So we're going to pass in a variable to this function, and the number we pass is the amount of objects that we're going to want to create. Just going to do some tidying up here. Now globally, I want to limit these. So when I create var or variable objects outside of functions, it means that any function can access them at any time. And a big one here is I need num objects to exist beforehand, and I'm going to set it to a default of 0. So by default, it's going to create 0 objects. I'm also going to create a maximum number it can have because I don't want my computer blowing up. Going to call it max object, and to keep it simple, I'm going to set the max they can possibly be to 10. And just for reference, we're going to need to set a size for our object, so I'm going to call it object size, and that is going to be equal to 30. Let's create a nice round one. And when I say object, naturally I'm meaning button for this. A bit more tidying up. Make a comment, so you say global variables, starting number of objects, maximum possible objects, size of objects. Now we're not going to need maths at the moment, so I'm going to put this right down the bottom just so it's out of the way for us, and then it means we can focus on our function here. So object creation. Function to create and control a number of objects within max. Now that I've declared the max that the number of objects is equal to a, I'm going to introduce some limiting here. So what I'm going to do is before I declare the internal variable, I'm going to say limiter. I'm going to say if a is less than 0, then a is equal to 0, and if a is greater than max objects, then a is equal to max objects. So what that does is it just means that our max project can't go into a negative and then hence Stack Underflow and explode, and it can't go too far so that it's having to deal with too much and it gets bogged down. So now we have it limited, so it will only allow us to create 0 and 10 objects. We've got our internal variable becoming number of objects because we can't reference this or we can't change this number. So to make use of it, we need to declare this internal variable. And then let's create some objects. Create objects. So to create objects, what we're going to do is we're going to set our JavaScript on a loop. So we're going to do for variable I equals 0, I less than max objects, I plus plus. So this is just very standard coding practice for loops. So what this is saying is, well, I is current for I between 0 and our max object. So for 0 to 10, it's going to do something. And what is that something going to be? What is that something going to be indeed? If you think about when we place an object in max, so let's do new object here and test, let's call it anything. And we look at the inspector, you can see that it's given x, a y, a size, and a width. And we need to pass the same thing to the information in JavaScript. So we're going to need an x position, y position, And then we've already created our size up here. Now, the reason I'm not declaring X and Y position as global variables is because we're hoping to produce more than one object. And if we had these as global, it means that they would all appear on top of each other. So we're going to do a neat trick using the current integer location to allow us to set the position. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to create a new variable here called object inset, and I'm going to make that about 100. Set the x/y inset of the objects. So what that's meaning is that the first object will be created about 100 in and 100 down, just so it's not right in the corner and inaccessible to me. So our x position is going to be our object inset, so 100 plus our object inset, object size plus our object size times by I. So what does that mean? That means that the x position, so that this way, is going to be 100. It's going to start here, and then it's going to be plus our object size, so 30, so one complete one, and then we're going to plus it by our object size again, so there's a 30 gap, and then we're going to times it by the current integer, which means that we should have, so we're going to use buttons, they should appear, so button, one gap, button, button, one gap, button, button, one gap, button. They should start appearing in a pattern like that. We'll see if it does in a minute. For our Y position, we're going to do something very similar, but we just need it to be the object inset. So now that we've declared that, we can actually make the object. This is where, if you're familiar with JavaScript, things will start looking a bit different. So we're going to do this dot patcher dot new object, and then all you need to do is know the name of an object in Max. In this case, I'm going to do button. I'm going to pass it the X position, Y position, object size, and then I'm going to pass it 0. So much like our object in here, we've got its X, its Y, its height, and its width. Now the reason that this is 0, objects have a minimum size in Max on the height, so having 0 there means it'll just be the minimum it can possibly be. Right, so all things going smoothly, if we save that, I'm just going to do some basic formatting here. Nothing's gone wrong yet, so all we need to do is pass it one number, our function which is object creation $1. Whoa, and it gets angry at us. So object size is not defined, line 23. So line 23, object size, space, that is because I called it object capital S. Save, save. And there we go. So it will create buttons up to a maximum of 10. But the problem is now, it has now created hundreds of buttons on top of each other. So let's add a way to delete objects outside of Max in our JavaScript file as well. So what do we want to do? If you've ever done any sort of internal scripting in Max, you'll know that each object has the possibility for a scripting name. And this is thanks to the dude 837. I'll link him up here. I think his name's Sam. He, in his JavaScript tutorial where he makes a massive sampler, he hooked me up on how to delete objects through JavaScript. So shout out to him. Link down below. Go and check him out. So what we're going to do is we're going to use that internal scripting language as a way for us to delete our object. So every time we create an object, we're going to give it a name, and then we're going to use that name to delete them. When we create our object, we're going to do variable new object equals So all we've done here is we've now created an internal variable that turns out to be all of our buttons. And the reason we do that is because we can do new object, so our new array dot var name, give it a variable name in max, and we're going to call it just object plus I. And because we're still in the loop, it means each instance, every time it runs through, will be given a unique name. So now, if I cut paste, have a look at this, you can see that this is object 3, object 2, object 1, and obviously object 0 because that's where it starts from. So now each of our objects has a name. All we need to do is every time that our object creation function is ran, before we make anything, let's delete all the old ones. So we're going to do delete old boxes or object, and then we're going to put in for variable I equals 0, I less than max objects, I plus plus. Now, the reason we use max objects here is because we've limited it so that there is only a maximum number of objects that there can be. And what that means, max is really good, is that if it receives a message to delete an object that doesn't exist, so say we only have 9, and object 10 is trying to be deleted, nothing happens. So we can get away with it this way, and that's what I was struggling to get around thanks to the dude. So we do, we're going to make a new variable called old object, and we're going to do equals this dot patcher dot get named. So now instead of giving it a variable name, we're going to get the name of speech object plus I, and then we're going to do this dot patcher dot remove old object. And just like that, if we save, I'm just going to clear that and compile it. There should be no errors. Nothing happens. I have made a mistake somewhere. Just having a look here, it's definitely added in our delete. I am going to move this down into here. I have made a mistake somewhere. Something is not right. Because every time it receives a number, it is creating all 10 objects. So let's do some problem solving. Right, so here's our first mistake, is when I'm creating objects, it was always going to the maximum number, when really we want to do num objects. So now it should only create the number that we specify. There we go, that's much better. And now, because we've updated it, our delete code is also working. So now when I scroll through, it's automatically adding and deleting them as we go, in a nice line with a space to separate them. Fantastic. And the first one, if we have a look here, is at 100, 100. Everything has worked perfectly. It was just one simple variable. Right, so now that's done. What can we do with this? Now, I'm a big advocate of automating or using this for things like automation. So I'm going to create a new integer here, and I'm going to, in its scripting name, I'm going to call it my integer. And I want a way to connect all these buttons to a message, and in that message to this integer here, so that when we press one of our buttons, it has a matching message, and that message then feeds into here. So how do we go about doing it? Well, the message part is easy because we've done half of the code here, but instead of creating messages, or instead of creating objects, we're going to create messages. So in the same for loop, I'm going to create messages. I'm essentially just going to copy this entire code here, because the same X and Y are useful. But instead of new message, I'm going to do new object. I'm going to do new message. I'm going to call it a message box. Now, messages can have a minimum size, so I'm just going to do object size in here just to make sure it's not too squished. and then I'm going to give each of it a name again because we're going to do the same delete trick. New message, var name, message I. And just to give it a bit of offset, I'm going to do x position plus object size and y position plus object. So all things going smoothly, a message box should now be created between each of the objects or our buttons. Fantastic. We still need to add in the code to delete it, but we know exactly how to do that. Again, copying this code, old objects and messages, var old messages, get named message, remove old messages. Save it, cut it, paste it. Oh, need to delete all the ones that didn't exist before that. And massive, I don't know why I said massive, but there we go. So now we have buttons, object 0 paired with a message 0. All we need to do now is give these a value and connect these in the generation process as well. Let me just clean this up a bit. So in here, outside of the create loop, we're going to put info into messages, and then we're going to do very similar to here, the same for loop, but the reason we can't put it in here is we need the messages to already have been created before we can go back and add information to them. So we add a second for loop using the same method. We do variable message boxes. Now I'm being really untidy with my variable names because these are all internal. They can really be whatever you want, but it's nicer if you name them things you're going to know. This dot patcher dot get named, and it's very similar to what we've done before. Message plus I, and then this time, instead of deleting them, I'm going to send it a message. So what this is going to do is it's going to look for patcher objects called message plus I, so message 0, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then it's going to give it a message, so as if I was passing it a message, and all I want that message to say is set, which is the command to set a message to something, and then I'm going to add the I. So what this is saying is pass each message box that we create a message that says set and then I, and I is equal to the current rotation through to the maximum number of objects, so it should be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. So if we save that, test it, still no issues. Oh, instead of plus here, we need to send a separate comment, so it's going to be comma I. There we go, fantastic. So now each message is being sent a message that sets its value to its value. So the final thing we need to do then is link this to here and then this to here. Now it's easy for us to connect a message to the integer because we know what the name of it is as it's created, so we can just link this to that as this is made. To do that, we add a line to the bottom of our create objects, and all it needs to say is connect to integer this dot patcher dot hidden connect, which is the name to create a path between them or snap them together. New message, the name of our message. 0, which is the first outlet of our message box. This dot patcher dot get named my integer is what we call this integer box down here. And again, we're going to go to the first inlet of that integer box. Save that. And now, this stupid autocompile thing is driving me crazy. Now, each message we create should connect to our integer. Amazing. But now, final stage is connect our button to our messages as they're made. And same as when we put information into the messages, we need them both to exist before we can connect them. So we add a final for loop. I'm going to just copy this, paste that. Connect message and object. Same. We are going to have a variable for our message box, a variable for our object boxes, object, and then taking from this here, we're going to have this dot patcher dot hidden connect object boxes, the first outlet of our button connected to the first inlet of our message. Save that, refresh this, and now you'll see each of our buttons connects to the message and each of our messages connects to the integer. So now when we bang them, we have values. And hidden connect means that when you go into non-edit mode, you can't see them. So presumption would be just connect means that they will connect with permanently visible patching cards. And that is just a really quick example, or I say really quick as we're 40 minutes in. That's just some of the things you can do to create objects, connect objects, delete objects, and then manipulate values inside JavaScript using Max.